The winter winds howled across the plains like a wounded beast, carrying with them the scent of pine and death. The year was 1878, deep in the rugged lands near the Wyoming border, where only the desperate or the damned chose to live. Through the swirling snow, a woman trudged forward, her face pale, her breath ragged. In her arms she held a small bundle wrapped in an old wool blanket. Her name was Clara Weston, and for 3 days she had walked through the wilderness, chasing the faint hope that someone, anyone, would take pity on her dying child. The child's name was Hannah, a girl no older than 6, feverish and barely breathing. The townsfolk of Dead River had turned Clara away. Half-blood, they called the child, whispering cruel words about her father, a man from a nearby native tribe. No doctor would touch the girl. No preacher would pray over her. By the 4th night, Clara's strength gave out. The storm had thickened to a blinding white wall, and she could no longer tell east from west. Then, through the blur of snow, she saw smoke, a faint gray ribbon rising from the pines, a cabin. When she reached the door, she didn't knock at first. She simply stood there, her lips trembling, whispering words she could barely say. "Please, help me bury her." Inside the cabin, Jonah Hale, a man in his 40s with the eyes of someone who had seen too much, froze at the sound. For 10 years, Jonah had lived alone, a hunter, a recluse, a man who'd once worn the blue coat of the Union Army and now wanted nothing more than silence. His wife, a Shoshone woman, had been killed years ago by the same kind of men who now filled the towns with their laws and hatred. When Jonah opened the door, the sight before him stopped his breath. The woman's hair was white with frost, her arms shaking under the child's weight. He didn't speak at first, only motioned her inside. The heat of the fire seemed to fight with the cold that had claimed Clara's bones. She laid the child on the floor by the fire, unwrapped the blanket, and Jonah's world tilted. The girl's chest, it moved. Barely, but it moved. "She's still alive," he said quietly. Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her frozen cheeks. "No, I saw her stop breathing. I saw." Jonah knelt beside the girl, feeling the faintest pulse. His hands, rough from years of solitude, began to work almost instinctively, checking her skin, her heartbeat, her breath. The old surgeon in him, the man he had buried under layers of guilt and whiskey, came alive again. As the night wore on, Clara watched him, a stranger who spoke few words, yet carried an invisible pain deeper than anyone she could see. And in that lonely mountain cabin, surrounded by snow and ghosts, a spark of life flickered back to the world. Neither of them knew it yet, but this night, the night Clara Weston came to bury her child, would be the beginning of everything. Morning came slowly, crawling over the peaks like a wounded animal. Snow still fell, soft and silent now, burying the tracks that led to Jonah's cabin. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of smoke, pine, and medicine. Clara woke to the crackle of the fire. For the first few seconds, she didn't know where she was. Only the dull ache in her arms reminded her of the child she still held. Then she heard a weak cough. Hannah. Her daughter's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever but alive. A sound escaped Clara's throat, half sob, half prayer. She leaned over, pressing her lips to the child's forehead. "You're here, my sweet girl. You're still here." From across the room, Jonah's deep voice broke the silence. "She's burning up, but her pulse is steady. The worst of the cold's past." Clara turned toward him. He was sitting by the table, mixing something in a tin cup, a murky liquid that smelled of herbs and smoke. His hands were steady, though his eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept all night. "You're a doctor?" she asked, still dazed. Jonah didn't look up. "Used to be. Army surgeon back before the war ended, and the world went to hell." He handed her the cup. "Get her to drink this. It'll break the fever." Clara hesitated for only a moment before lifting Hannah gently. The child's lips trembled as the bitter mixture touched her tongue, but she swallowed. Jonah watched silently, his jaw tightening as if fighting memories that clawed at the edges of his mind. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees. Inside, the fire popped and hissed, the only witness to two broken souls learning to breathe again. Clara looked around the cabin. It was simple but built with care, shelves lined with dried herbs, a rifle over the door, a Bible gathering dust on the table. Everything about the place spoke of solitude and pain. "You live out here alone?" she asked quietly. Jonah nodded. "Ain't much reason to go back down there. People down in Dead River, they don't take kindly to strangers." Clara lowered her gaze. "They didn't take kindly to me either." Her words hung between them, heavy and sharp. Jonah didn't ask for details. He already knew the type of cruelty that came from men who called themselves civilized. For a moment, there was only the sound of fire and wind. Then Jonah spoke again, softer this time. "Rest while you can. The storm's not done yet. You'll need your strength if you're planning to leave." Clara's voice trembled. "I wasn't planning to." Jonah looked at her for the first time, really looked. The stubbornness in her eyes, the bruises of loss, the fragile courage that somehow refused to die. Outside, the storm howled again. But inside the small cabin, something else began to stir, not the warmth of fire, but the first fragile spark of trust. Night returned swiftly, covering the mountains in deep blue shadows. The wind outside screamed against the wooden walls like the voices of the lost. Inside, the fire burned lower, throwing long orange ribbons across the room. Jonah sat by the hearth, sharpening his knife. The rhythmic scrape of steel filled the silence. Clara watched from the corner, cradling Hannah, who had finally drifted into a fragile sleep. "She's resting easier," Clara whispered, as if afraid to disturb the air. Jonah nodded but didn't look up. "She's strong, stronger than most grown men I've known." Clara smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Her father was strong too. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Jonah's hand froze mid-motion, his eyes lifting slowly to meet hers. "He was Shawnee," she said after a pause, voice trembling but defiant. "The town never forgave me for loving him. They said I betrayed my own kind. When he died, they made sure I paid the price." Jonah set the knife down, the steel gleaming in the firelight. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "They'll find any excuse to hate what they don't understand." Clara looked at him, studying the deep lines on his face, the kind carved by grief, not time. "You sound like you know something about that." Jonah stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "My wife was Shoshone. They killed her because she wore my name." The air between them turned heavy, the kind that carried pain too deep for words. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, as if it too was mourning the ghosts that filled the cabin. Finally, Clara said quietly, "I'm sorry." Jonah gave a slow nod. "You don't have to be. The world don't change easy, but sometimes it gives you one more chance to set things right." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the storm. The snow had eased, the moon faintly breaking through torn clouds. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll take you to the creek. There's clean water and roots we can boil for her. The fever needs to run its course." Clara's eyes softened. "You don't have to help us." Jonah turned back, his voice low but steady. "I already didn't help once. Never again." He didn't explain, and she didn't ask, but she saw it, the grief buried behind his eyes. The kind only a man who'd lost everything could carry. That night, as Clara drifted between sleep and wakefulness, she thought she heard another sound beneath the wind, not the storm, but the slow, steady rhythm of life returning. Hannah's breathing was deeper now, stronger. Her tiny hand reached out in her sleep, grasping her mother's finger. Outside, the snow began to fall gently again, soft and forgiving, as if the mountains themselves were watching over them. For the first time in many years, Jonah Hale felt something stir within his chest, something he thought the war, the hatred, and the loneliness had burned away forever. Hope. The dawn broke slow and gray, the world outside Jonah's cabin buried under a fresh blanket of snow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt sacred. Only the distant caw of a raven broke the stillness. Clara stirred near the fire, rubbing her stiff hands together. Her daughter still slept, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Jonah had been up since before dawn, his silhouette framed against the frosted window as he prepared their morning fire. When Clara rose, he spoke without turning. "Bundle the girl. We're going to the creek." She blinked, confused. "Now, it's freezing." Jonah glanced over his shoulder, his eyes steady. "That's when the water's cleanest. We'll need it for her fever. And you'll need to walk. After nights like these, people freeze not from cold, but from sitting too long." There was no arguing with him. She wrapped Hannah tightly in wool, tucked her close, and followed him outside. The cold bit deep. The world glittered in silver and white. Every step crunched in the snow. The creek lay a quarter-mile down the slope, its surface half frozen, steam rising where water still ran free beneath the ice. Jonah knelt, chopping a hole with his hatchet, his movements slow but precise. Clara stood nearby, watching him, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "You've lived here long?" she asked softly. "10 years," Jonah said without looking up. "Long enough to know when the land's angry, and when it forgives." She knelt beside him, peering into the water as he filled the canteens. "Why stay? You could have gone anywhere." Jonah paused, eyes on the reflection of his scarred face in the dark water. "I did go. Nowhere worth staying. The mountains? They don't lie to you. They take what they want and leave you with what you've earned." Clara studied him, the thick fur draped across his shoulders, the worn leather gloves, the quiet strength in every movement. There was something tragic and noble about him, something carved from the same stone as the peaks around them. As they turned to head back, Hannah stirred weakly, murmuring something in her sleep. Clara smiled, tightening her hold. "She's stronger today." Jonah gave a small nod. "She's fighting. That's good. The world don't make room for quitters." They walked in silence, the snow crunching beneath their boots, smoke from the cabin curling upward in the distance. For a moment, it almost looked like peace. When they reached the door, Jonah stopped. His eyes drifted toward the tree line. Clara followed his gaze. "What is it?" "Tracks," he said quietly. "Fresh ones. Human." The prince led toward the cabin from the south ridge, not from any deer or wolf. Jonah's hand instinctively went to the rifle leaning by the door. His voice dropped low, calm but cold. "Someone's been here." Clara clutched Hannah tighter, her heartbeat quickening. Jonah crouched beside the prince, his gloved fingers brushing lightly over the snow. The edges were clean, not yet softened by wind. Someone had been there less than an hour ago. He followed the trail with his eyes until it vanished into the pine line. "One rider," he muttered. "Maybe two. Horses were tired. Whoever it was, they weren't hunting." Clara stood by the door, Hannah clinging weakly to her shoulder. "You think they were looking for us?" Jonah shook his head slowly, though the tension in his jaw said otherwise. "Could be trappers. Could be worse." He rose to his full height, scanning the ridge one last time before pulling the door shut behind them. The warmth of the fire returned, but the comfort was gone. Clara set Hannah back near the hearth, covering her with blankets. "I don't understand. We're miles from the nearest town." Jonah checked his rifle, loading a fresh round. "That's exactly why I built this place here." For a long while, there was only the sound of the fire. Then Clara asked quietly, "Who would come all the way out here in a storm like this?" Jonah hesitated before answering. "The kind of men who don't care about weather or God." He didn't say the rest, that once, years ago, those same kind of men had ridden up another mountain just like this one, that they had burned his home and taken everything he loved. He'd buried the past under snow and silence, but the mountains had long memories. Clara sensed the shift in him, the way his voice hardened. "You think they're coming for you?" He gave a small, humorless laugh. "No one comes for a ghost. Still, He checked the shutters, the back door, the rifle near the table. The soldier in him, the part he tried to bury, was awake again. As the day wore on, the sky darkened. Snow began to fall once more, gentler this time. But Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that something watched from the trees. Clara moved quietly, tending to Hannah, stirring a pot of stew over the fire. She tried to act calm, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. At dusk, Jonah stepped outside again. The air was deathly still, the kind that carries secrets. He knelt by the tree line where the tracks had been. They were fading now, filling with snow, but near one of them, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A fragment of cloth torn and half frozen into the ice. Dark red plaid, a pattern he remembered too well. He clenched it in his fist, staring at it as if the ears had collapsed into a single breath. "Everett," he whispered. The name hit the air like a curse. When he came back inside, Clara saw the change in him immediately. His shoulders were rigid, his eyes distant, haunted. "Jonah, what is it?" He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw fear behind his calm. "A man I once buried. Looks like he didn't stay that way." By the next morning, the storm had passed again, but the air felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. Even the ravens had gone silent. Jonah stood by the window, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the distant tree line. A thin line of smoke curled against the pale sky, too far to be from their fire, too straight to be natural. Someone was out there. Clara noticed his tension. "You saw them, didn't you?" He nodded once. "Free riders. Maybe 4. Moving slow, staying low. They're not hunters." Clara's heart clenched. "You think it's Anne?" Jonah didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. He began to move with quiet precision, like a man who had done this many times before. He checked the rifle, reloaded his revolver, then crossed to the back door, securing the latch with an iron bar. Clara followed in. "What do we do?" "You do nothing," he said firmly. "You keep that fire low. Keep the girl quiet. And if I tell you to run, you run." Outside, the crunch of hooves broke the silence. The sound was distant, but coming closer, the slow, deliberate rhythm of men who weren't afraid to be heard. Jonah stepped out onto the porch, snow squeaking beneath his boots. The horizon glowed faintly gold from the morning sun, but the light only made the figures in the distance clearer. 4 riders in long coats, their horses pushing through the snow like shadows from another world. He recognized the one in front instantly. Thomas Everett. The years had changed him, his beard streaked with gray, his hat lower, but his arrogance was the same. The man who'd once led the raid that killed. Jonah's wife now rode with that same crooked smile. Everett raised a hand in mock greeting. "Jonah Hale, thought you were long buried under this mountain." Jonah's grip tightened around his rifle. "Guess you didn't dig deep enough?" Everett laughed. "Still got that tongue. Good, I came for something else this time. There's a woman and a child. Folks in town say they ran this way. You seen them?" Jonah's jaw flexed. "Ain't seen no one but ghosts." Everett tilted his head. "Ghosts? Maybe that's what you've been keeping company with all these years." The other men chuckled, their laughter cold as the wind. Jonah said nothing. His eyes never left Everett's hands. He saw the twitch, the subtle shift before the draw. "Don't," Jonah said quietly. Everett smiled wider. "You always were quick, Hale. Let's see if time slowed you down." The world moved in a single breath. Everett's hand darted toward his holster, but Jonah was faster. A thunderous crack split the still air. Everett's hat flew from his head as the bullet grazed it clean. "Next one," Jonah said, voice low, "ain't for warning." The men froze. For a long, terrible second, no one moved. Then Everett raised a hand, signaling them back. "You got guts, old man," he called, retreating slowly. "But we'll be back. You can't guard ghosts forever." The sun was sinking behind the peaks, casting long crimson shadows across the valley. Inside the cabin, the air was heavy, thick with fear, smoke, and quiet determination. Jonah moved with calm precision, the way a man does when every motion could be his last. He pulled a table against the door, reinforced the shutters with timber, and checked each window slit where a rifle could fit. Clara watched him silently, her hands shaking as she wrapped blankets around Hannah. The little girl slept deeply, exhausted but peaceful, unaware of the storm gathering beyond the walls. "Will they come back tonight?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jonah didn't stop working. "If I were them, I'd wait for dark. Fear does half the work for you when the light dies." He looked up then, meeting her eyes. "You're not to make a sound if they come close, no matter what you hear. You understand?" Clara nodded, her throat tight. "And you?" He smiled faintly, a small, tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be busy." She wanted to argue, to beg him to run, to say that vengeance wasn't worth dying for, but one look at him silenced her. This was a man who'd already lost everything once. Now, protecting them wasn't duty, it was redemption. Jonah poured kerosene into an old lantern and lit it. The flame flickered weakly, dancing shadows across his face. He took a deep breath and said quietly, "They burned my home once, killed her for wearing my name. I swore I'd never let it happen again." Clara stepped closer, the firelight soft on her face. "Then you won't be fighting alone." Jonah looked at her, this fragile woman who had crossed a frozen wilderness, carrying her dying child, and somehow still found courage left to stand beside him. "You ever used a rifle?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "My father taught me, before the war." He handed her a small carbine from the wall, its metal worn but clean. "Then you'll take the back window. Only shoot if they breach the porch." For a moment, their hands brushed rough, cold skin meeting warmth. In that small touch, something wordless passed between them. Not love, not yet, but the kind of understanding only born in survival. The last light faded from the window. Night fell, silent and merciless. Jonah doused the main fire, leaving only embers glowing faintly beneath the hearth. "They'll see the smoke if it burns too bright," he murmured. Outside, the forest whispered. A branch snapped somewhere in the dark. Then another. Clara froze, eyes wide. "Jonah?" He raised a hand, signaling silence. Slowly, he moved to the door, rifle ready, his breath steady. The horse's hooves came first, faint but distinct, crunching snow in slow rhythm. Then came voices, laughter. Everett's drawl carried through the night. "Didn't I say, boys? The mountain ghosts are still breathing." The first shot shattered the silence. The window splintered beside Clara's head, glass raining across the floor. She ducked instinctively, clutching her rifle tight to her chest. Hannah woke screaming, the sound small and terrified against the roaring wind outside. Jonah was already moving. He threw open the side window and fired into the dark. 1, 2, 3 shots. The muzzle flash lit the cabin like lightning, showing a glimpse of riders darting between the trees. "Down!" he shouted. Bullets ripped into the wooden walls, punching holes through the logs. Snow blew in through every crack. The smell of gunpowder and burning kerosene filled the air. Clara dragged Hannah behind the heavy table, shielding her with her body. Her hands shook, but she remembered his words, "Only shoot if they breach the porch." Outside, Everett's voice rang out above the storm. "Jonah Hale, thought you'd die alone up here. Guess we'll grant your wish tonight." Jonah's reply was a single shot, clean, deliberate. One of the men screamed and fell from his horse. The others spread out. Torches flared in the night, their orange glow reflecting off the snow. The cabin was surrounded now. Clara felt her heart hammering in her chest. She peeked over the table. Jonah reloaded with mechanical precision. Eyes narrowed, movements smooth and controlled. He wasn't panicking. He was at war again. Then came the smell of smoke. She turned toward the back wall. Flames flickered outside the window. "They're burning us out," she cried. Jonah swore under his breath, grabbing the bucket near the hearth and dousing the flames before they could spread inside. "Keep low." He kicked the back door open and rolled into the snow. firing at the shadows near the trees. 2 men broke cover, running toward the cabin with torches. Jonah dropped one before the second reached the porch. A gunshot cracked through the dark. Jonah staggered, a grazing hit along his arm. Blood stained the snow as he fell to one knee, teeth clenched against the pane. Inside, Clara saw him go down. For a heartbeat, fear froze her, then she grabbed the rifle and ran to the door. "Clara, stay inside," he shouted, but she didn't listen. She leveled the gun, aimed at the moving torchlight, and fired. The shot struck true. The second man fell backward into the snow, the torch extinguished beside him. Jonah looked at her, startled, then proud. "You shoot like you mean it." She reloaded, hands trembling. "You told me to wait until they were close." The standoff dragged on. The wind howled. The torches faded as Everett's men pulled back behind the ridge, shouting orders to each other. Jonah crouched beside Clara near the doorway. Blood trickled down his sleeve, but his focus wasn't broken. "They'll come again," he said. "When the wind shifts, they think we're scared." Clara looked at him, her breath misting in the cold. "Are we?" He smiled faintly. "Not yet." The night burned red. Everett's men came again, shouting, firing, their torches painting the snow with flame. Bullets tore through the walls, the air thick with smoke and splinters. The cabin groaned like a dying beast. Jonah ducked behind the window frame, returning fire. 2 men fell, another disappeared into the trees. But there were too many. He could see their shadows spreading out, circling for a final push. "Clara," he called, "take Hannah to the cellar, now." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll draw them off." "Go." Clara grabbed her daughter, half running, half crawling through the smoke toward the trapdoor. Hannah cried softly against her chest. The mother's heart ached with every sound, every footstep of gunfire above. Jonah reloaded, blood running from his shoulder where the bullet had grazed earlier. He kicked the door open and stepped into the storm. The cold hit him like stone. Torches burned in a half circle around the cabin, Everett's men closing in. Grinning through the snow, Everett stood at the center, revolver in hand, his coat flapping in the wind like a flag of war. "You always were too proud to die easy, Hale," he shouted. Jonah raised his rifle. "And you always talk too much." He fired. Everett dove aside as the bullet ripped past, striking one of his men. Gunfire erupted, a chaos of light and thunder in the dark. Jonah moved with the precision of a soldier reborn, every shot deliberate, every step driven by memory and vengeance. Then, click, the rifle jammed. Everett saw his chance. He advanced through the storm, revolver steady, eyes cold. End of the line, mountain man. Jonah dropped the useless rifle, drew his knife. "Come take it." They collided in the snow, the fight raw and brutal. Metal clashed, breath steaming in the frozen air. Everett's blade slashed Jonah's coat. Jonah drove his shoulder forward, tackling him into the drift. They rolled, punching, clawing, until Everett's revolver flew into the dark. Jonah pinned him down, knife pressed to his throat. For a heartbeat, everything stopped, only the wind screaming above them. Everett's eyes gleamed with hate. "You can't kill me, Hale. Killing me won't bring her back." Jonah's grip tightened. The knife trembled. "No," he said softly, "but it might let her rest." Then he drove the blade home. Everett gasped once, then went still. Jonah staggered back, chest heaving, blood and snow mixing at his feet. He looked up. Dawn was breaking through the trees, pale light spilling over the ridge. The gunfire had stopped. The surviving men had fled. The siege was over. Jonah dropped to one knee, exhausted. Smoke rose from the cabin, half burned, half standing. Inside, he heard the cellar door creak open. Clara emerged, holding Hannah close. Her face was streaked with soot, but her eyes shone with life. "It's over." Jonah nodded weakly. "It's over." Years passed quietly on the mountain. The winters came and went, carving the same valleys, painting the same forests white. Yet the cabin on the ridge no longer stood in silence. Smoke once again rose from its chimney, this time soft and steady, not the angry plume of a siege, but the calm breath of life. Hannah had grown tall and strong, her once frail body now full of laughter. She moved easily through the pines, basket in hand, gathering herbs the way Jonah had taught her. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes bright as mountain water. Clara watched her from the porch, a faint smile on her lips. The years had marked her, small lines by her eyes, silver strands in her hair, but peace had made her beautiful in a different way. The fear was gone, replaced by quiet strength. Jonah was older too, his beard streaked with gray, his hands slower but steady. He split wood near the cabin, the axe swinging with practiced rhythm. The scars on his arms still ached when it rained, but he never complained. Life had become a collection of small, perfect rituals: the sound of chopping wood, the smell of stew simmering on the stove, the laughter of a girl who had once been near death. Sometimes at night, when the fire burned low, Jonah would sit outside with a cup of coffee and watch the stars climb above the ridge. The ghosts that once haunted him had grown quiet, not gone, but at peace. He had buried Everett's body in the valley below, under a pine tree. No marker, no name. Let the mountain keep him, Jonah had said, and it did. Every spring, wildflowers grew there, blood red, stubborn against the melting snow. One evening, Hannah joined him by the fire, her voice curious. "Mama says you used to be a soldier." Jonah nodded slowly. "That was a long time ago." "Did you win?" she asked. He smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the fire. "No one ever wins wars, little one. You just live through them." She thought about that for a while, then asked, "So why did you fight?" He looked at her, at the child who had saved him without knowing it. "Because sometimes the only way to protect what's left is to stand your ground, even if it costs you." Hannah leaned against him, small and warm. "Mama says you saved us." Jonah shook his head gently. "You and your mama saved me first." The fire crackled softly, the mountainside under the stars. For the first time in a lifetime, Jonah Hale felt the weight of the world lift, not because it had grown lighter, but because he had grown strong enough to carry it. He looked toward the horizon, where dawn would come again, and thought, maybe peace isn't the absence of ghosts, maybe it's learning to live beside them. The first snow of the new winter came quietly. It drifted down like ash, soft and endless, covering the cabin, the trees, the graves, the scars. Inside, Clara sat by the fire, her journal open on her knees. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed by years and smoke. She wrote slowly, her handwriting steady despite the tremor of age. "There was a time when I thought the mountain wanted to bury us, but now I see it was teaching us how to live." She paused, looking up at the window. Hannah was outside, laughing, throwing snow at Jonah as he tried, unsuccessfully, to look stern. The air was filled with their voices, their joy echoing off the trees. "The day I came here, I carried my child in my arms, ready to bury her. I thought I had reached the end, but that day became our beginning." The fire crackled. The room smelled of pine and tea. Jonah stepped inside, shaking the snow from his coat. His movements were slower now, but his eyes, those quiet, steady eyes, still held the same warmth that had once frightened her with its strength. He sat beside her, glancing at the journal. Writing again. She smiled, just trying to remember the days before they fade. He looked toward the window, where Hannah danced through the falling snow. "Some things never fade," he said softly. "We built this life from ash and loss." Clara continued to write. "And somehow, in the heart of the wild, we found peace. Not the kind that comes from safety, but the kind you earn after you've walked through fire and survived." The wind whispered against the walls, but it no longer sounded like mourning, it sounded like a song. Clara closed the journal, tying it shut with a leather cord. She set it on the shelf beside an old photograph. The three of them standing in front of the rebuilt cabin, the mountains behind them endless and bright. She turned to Jonah, resting her hand on his. "When the time comes," she said gently, "promise me you'll read it to her, all of it." He nodded, his voice low. "I will." Outside, the snow kept falling, wrapping the world in white silence. Hannah ran back to the porch, her cheeks flushed, holding something in her hands, a small sprig of wildflowers, stubbornly alive despite the frost. "Look," she cried, "they're growing again." Clara smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "they always do." Jonah looked out across the land. The mountain that had once been his prison, now his home. The place that had taken everything, had given him back more than he could have imagined. A family, a reason, and the quiet grace of redemption. As the firelight flickered and the storm sang beyond the door, the mountain seemed to breathe alive, eternal, and kind. And on the final page of Clara's journal, written in her steady hand, were the words that would outlive them all. "Love, when true, can bring even the dead back to life." The camera would slowly pull back, the cabin glowing in the snow, smoke rising gently into the pale sky.